Bhakti Vaibhava seminar. Right. And this evening we're going on to the 3rd chapter. Actually, just a little point for your interest in terms of our schedule, how we're actually doing everything, is that according to the schedule given to me by the organizers, I'm not really one of the organizers exactly, I'm just meant to try and give the classes. But anyway, according to that, this week and next week, of course, there'll be 5 days of study each week. So according to the schedule that they've given me, we do this week and next week, we do this 3rd chapter and the 4th chapter and the 5th chapter. I hope we're going to manage it, but that's what the schedule says. So, but anyway, let's see how it goes, and if it's a challenge, I'm sure we'll make a plan, because we don't want to just skimp over anything. Right, so devotees, chapter 3, for your information, there are 4 sections, according to my calculation. The first section is from verse 1 through to verse 30, would you believe? That's a big section. And it's called the main incarnations of the Lord. And it's a list. Essentially, it's a list of the main incarnations, culminating in Lord Krishna, who's not just an incarnation of the Lord, he is the Lord, who the others are incarnations of. Right. So then the second section is short, verses 31 to 34. And we call that the enlightenment of the pure spirit soul. The enlightenment of the pure spirit soul. And the third section is from verse 35 to 39. And we call that How to Know the Supreme Lord. That's section C. I give them letters in front of them. How to Know the Supreme Lord. And for section D, verses 40 to 44, the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam. The glories of Srimad Bhagavatam. Of course, there are different ways these things can be done. I'm not claiming that this is just absolutely it, but I do feel it covers things in quite a reasonable way. That's my personal opinion. So I'm happy enough with it being divided up like that. And it's just divided up like that to help you students. You're not going to be tested on what is this section, what is that section exactly. You're going to be tested on the actual information. So, right, Now, of course, normally we run through the translations, at least, of all the verses that in the section we're going to be doing when we start a new section. I won't do it here because there's 30 verses. And, you know, in a sense, it's relatively straightforward because each verse is about a different incarnation, at least in the great majority of cases, not exactly all, but in the great majority. Yeah. All right, so let us begin. Now, before we begin, I'd like to just draw your attention to something from the last section of the second chapter, which we were looking at on Thursday. And that last section began with, what was it? Verse 30. Yeah, it was verse 30, right? Was it verse 30? It was. Verse 30. And the two verses before, verses 28 and 29, they were all about Vasudeva this, Vasudeva that, Vasudeva Paro Dharmo, Vasudeva Paramo, Tapa or something, if you remember. Let me just have a quick look at it. Vasudeva Paraveda, Vasudeva Paramaka, Vasudeva Para Yoga, etc., etc. So, and we put those together, those two, as a section in and of themselves. And then from verse 30 till the end of the chapter was another section, which was basically, sort of expanding on those two and elaborating on 28 and 29. Now, the interesting thing is that in verse 30, well, if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but when we went through this last section, we saw how Srila Prabhupada, in the verses and sometimes the purports, was referring to the Lord as Vasudev. And even if you happen to be looking at verse 30 right now from chapter 2, then you'd see that Prabhupada translates, in the beginning of the material creation, that absolute personality of Godhead, Vasudev. Yeah, so in other words, it's relating back to those two verses, which are establishing that Vasudev, who is Krishna, not an avatar, not an expansion. He is actually the original Supreme Lord. So here he's being referred to as Bhagavan. And Bhagavan, of course, is a very special term because it generally, it means the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The term is used to refer to different incarnations and even sometimes devotees. Lord Brahma is referred to as Bhagavan, but anyway, the point is Bhagavan is sort of like the Sanskrit term for God. Krishna is Krishna, but if we are to use that term, it's sort of generic term, God, then in Sanskrit, Bhagavan is basically the term that would be used. And we'll see, hopefully this evening, if there's enough time, if we get through to verse 28, we'll see that Lord Krishna is referred to as Bhagavan. In fact, not just Bhagavan, but Swayam Bhagavan, which means the very one who is Bhagavan, not an expansion or incarnation or something like that, but the original. So that's just a little point of interest. Now, if we go on to where we're starting at the beginning of chapter 3. What do we see in the Sanskrit of verse 1, Sutaruvacha? Jagrihe Purusham Rupam Bhagavan Mahad Adibi Sambhutam Shodasha Kalam Adolokas Srikshaya. Well, let's just read the translation. Sutta said, in the beginning of the creation, the Lord, this is the term Bhagavan is being translated, the Lord, means we're going back to like the original. First expanded himself in the universal form of the Purusha incarnation and manifested all the ingredients for the material creation. And thus at first there was the creation of the 16 principles of material action. This was for the purpose of creating the material universes. So just bear that in mind. It's a point that, in other words, all these incarnations, with the exception of Krishna and Lord Balaram, they are incarnations of Bhagavan. Means the original one, the greatest. Okay, so let's just have a look at the purport here. And so as we saw from the translation, here, Sutta Goswami, who's speaking, he's going to list out the main incarnations as the title we've given this section from verse 1 to verse 30. Yeah, he's going to list them out with a little bit of information, not so much, a little bit about each one. A lot about Krishna. So, but, and as I said, and as we'll see, generally each incarnation gets one verse. Generally. However, interesting point, the Purusha avatars right now, they get 5 verses. Interesting. Well, it would appear because they're the first within the universe, and they have very specific and very foundational and important function within the universe, or to do with the universe at least. And at least 2 of them, because there are 3, as we'll read, there's 3 Purusha avatars, and they're considered 1 in 3. As you noticed, hopefully, in the verse it refers to the Purusha avatar, 1, not the Purusha avatars. Anyway, Purusha avatar is actually referring to Mahavishnu. So, yeah, and Mahavishnu, he's involved with the manifesting of the universe and the dissolution, not so much with what goes on in between when the universe is functional. But the other 2, Garbhadakshay Vishnu, Kshiradakshay Vishnu, they are 24/7 from the beginning of the universe to the very end until it's wound up. They are active. So therefore, their presence or their roles as incarnations have some special importance. Therefore, they're given more verses of a little more elaborate description. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada, we're in the purport now, right at the beginning. So Prabhupada mentions first of all that in Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita states that Krishna maintains the universes by extending his plenary expansions. So this is, first of all, at least in terms of the connection with the universes, first of all, it means Mahavishnu. So yeah, Krishna is the origin. Krishna is the origin. Prabhupada says it's the third sentence. The original personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, Lord Krishna, who's famous as the son of King Vasudeva or King Nanda, is full with all opulences, all potencies, all fame, all beauty, all knowledge, and all renunciation. Yes. So part of his opulence is manifested as impersonal Brahman, and part of his opulences are manifested as Paramatma. I don't know if it's clear to you there, but when Prabhupada uses the term Paramatma, well, actually, anyway, Krishna, of course, is the original Paramatma, but these three Vishnus, the Purusha avatars, they are all Paramatma. So Prabhupada lists them out there at the bottom of the paragraph. Karanadakshay Vishnu is the first of the three. And in fact, the verse itself is really referring to him. He manifested, he lay down on the causal ocean, manifested all the ingredients for the creation. And this was for the purpose of creating the universes. They haven't been created yet. It's pre-creation. Mahavishnu in his pre-creation phase. Then there's the others are known as Garbhodakshay Vishnu, who is in each universe one time, and Kshirodakshay Vishnu, who's in every atom. So, okay, bottom of the first paragraph, Karanadakshay Vishnu generates all the universes from his skin holes, the pores of his skin. And then in each of the universes, he enters, Karanadakshay enters as Garbhodakshay. So they're three, but they're one. They're one in three. One is expanding himself. So paragraph 2, let's see if there's, well, Prabhupada talks about the purpose of the creation to help the Nityabada, eternally conditioned souls, who are engaged in sense enjoyment, and they all have ahankara. They have the sense of individuality, or ahankara means I am, literally ahankara, I am the doer. I am the doer. That's a very literal translation. Yes. So the Lord, we're just going through the second paragraph step by step here. The Lord is really the only enjoyer. Everyone else, that's us devotees. We're enjoyed. Or, Prabhupada says, we are predominated enjoyers. As we give enjoyment to Krishna, we then get enjoyment, or we share his enjoyment. That's the sort of the idea. And if we do like that, then we can go back to Godhead, and we don't need to come back here. Otherwise, we have to again enter the Mahatattva. Yeah. Otherwise, we merge into the Mahatattva. Prabhupada says, if you look a little, sort of halfway down that paragraph, those who cannot catch the constitutional truth are again merged into the Mahatattva at the time of the annihilation, and then they enter Mahavishnu. Yes. And then when the next creation happens, then they come out again. So Mahatattva has all the ingredients. It has all the ingredients. This is where about, 5 or 6 or 7 sentences up from the bottom of the second paragraph. Primarily, this Mahatattva is divided into 16 parts, namely the 5 gross material elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, the 11 working instruments or senses. Yeah. So that's something about Mahavishnu, and we go on now to verse 2. So, verse 2 is now talking about Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, a part of the Purusha, a part of Mahavishnu, lies down within the water of the universe. From the navel lake of his body sprouts a lotus stem, and from the lotus flower atop the stem, Brahma, the master of all engineers in the universe, becomes manifest. So, well, you see there, Prabhupada says, first Purusha is Karanodakshaya Vishnu. Then in every universe, he enters. So this is, therefore we're saying one. There's one in 3 parts. I mean, actually the way it's put is one way. Karanodakshaya Vishnu is Paramatma, super soul of the whole creation. Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is super soul of each universe. And Kshirodakshaya Vishnu is the super soul, not just of all living beings, but of every atom of each universe. So Srila Prabhupada elaborates a bit on these. In every universe, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is there, lies down. Water comes out of his body, sort of like perspiration, and fills the lower half of the universe, and he lies down. A lotus flower comes from his navel. This is all in the first paragraph. And then Lord Brahma appears on top, comes up through the stem and manifests on top of the lotus flower. So it's his birthplace. And there are 14 planetary systems within the stem. We are within the stem, it seems. And the earthly planets, that's us, they're in the middle. Yes, so second paragraph, from Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, there's the expansion of Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, who's the collective Paramatma of all living beings. He's called Hari, and from him, all incarnations within the universe are expanded. Generally, they enter the universe through him. They enter through him, and then they come out into the universe and do their pastimes. So Prabhupada, let's see what is. Oh, then there's the third paragraph. Yeah, and Prabhupada just explains what we've been saying about these 3, the Purusha avatars. One who knows them, we should understand them, because I think you're going to be tested on them if you're trying to get a Bhakti Vaibhava. So one who knows these plenary features of the personality of Godhead knows Godhead properly. And thus the knower becomes freed from the material conditions of birth, death, old age, and disease, as is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. So that's the third paragraph. And the last paragraph, I won't go through it in detail because we've kind of looked at the most essential parts, shall I say. But actually in the fourth paragraph, which is the longest paragraph in the purport, Prabhupada is more or less going back over Mahavishnu, although the verses about Garbhodakshaya Vishnu quite clearly. But Prabhupada summarizes about Mahavishnu. He lies on the Karana ocean, causal ocean, and material nature manifests innumerable universes, and so on and so forth. And he talks about the materialists. They don't accept these things. And, they have their theories. And then Prabhupada makes the point, which we haven't really so much gone into so far. Material nature, this is in the middle of the paragraph, material nature has no power to create without the power of the Purusha. Just as a Prakriti or woman cannot produce a child without the connection of a Purusha or man. Yes, the Purusha impregnates and the Prakriti delivers. Right, so that's, just in general. But it also applies in terms of material nature. Without the input of the Lord, just simply the material nature, Prakriti, is not going to produce anything, any life or, as things as we know them. And Prabhupada makes a point, which is actually, it's an analogy, which is one of the analogies you're meant to know if you're doing the Bhakti Vaibhava. Prabhupada says, we should not expect milk from the fleshy bags on the neck of a goat, although they look like breastly nipples. Similarly, we should not expect any creative power from the material ingredients. We must believe in the power of the Purusha, who impregnates Prakriti or nature. So this example of the nipples on the neck of the goat not giving milk, you should try and learn. So let's have a look at verse 3. It is believed that all the universal planetary systems are situated on the extensive body of the Purusha, but he has nothing to do with the created material ingredients. His body is eternally in spiritual existence par excellence. And Prabhupada makes an important point here, which we have not really come across, I think, yet, that the conception of right at the beginning, conception of the Virat-rupa or Vishvarupa, these terms are synonyms, and they mean the universal form. So Prabhupada makes the point that the universal form is meant for the neophytes who can't grasp the idea of the absolute truth being a person. Yeah. So therefore they're given the example of the universal form, Vishvarup or Virat-rup, which is illusory. It's just a mental conception. It's not actually like a person or a real form. Yeah, it's certainly not a person. So, yes, for the neophytes or even pre-neophytes, the universal form may help them get the idea, oh, maybe the absolute truth could be a person. So Prabhupada goes on to give a little bit of a Chintya Bheda Bhed Tattva. It's right in the middle of the paragraph that the extension of power by the Lord and the Lord himself personally are one in one sense. But at the same time, the Mahatattva is different from the Lord. So the Mahatattva and the Lord, there's so one in difference. Therefore, the potency of the Lord and the Lord are simultaneously different and non-different. Yeah. So that's there. So therefore, the conception of the universal form, especially for the impersonalists, is non-different in a sense from the eternal form of the Lord. Yes, okay. So, all right, let's go on to verse 4. Which is still, it's still about the Purushas. Yeah. The devotees with their perfect eyes see the transcendental form of the Purusha, who has thousands of legs, thighs, arms, and faces, all extraordinary. In that body there are thousands of heads, ears, eyes, and noses. They're decorated with thousands of helmets and glowing earrings and are adorned with garlands. So, yeah, the devotees with their perfect eyes, the ones who have the perfect eyes. But as Prabhupada says here, with our present materialized senses, we cannot perceive anything of the transcendental Lord. But the devotees, the advanced devotees who have perfect eyes, they can. Yeah. So in other words, and Prabhupada explains, that we have to engage in pure devotional service. Prabhupada just in the third sentence says in Bhagavad Gita, it's confirmed that the transcendental Lord can be perceived only by pure devotional service. That's Bhagavad Gita 11:54. Bhaktya tvananyaya sakya aham evam vadorjana gyatam drashtam cha tatvena praveshtum cha parantapa. So then Prabhupada makes reference of how in Brahma Samhita there's the famous verse, Premanjana Charita Bhakti Valochanena. He doesn't quote the verse, he just mentions. In Brahma Samhita it's said like that, that for those devotees whose eyes have been treated with the ointment of love, then they can see the Lord. Hridayeshu, within their hearts, they can see the Lord. He's always visible to them. But they are Prem Anjana. Anjana, did they use the term in Hindi, Anjan? So, not so much. Kajal. Kajal, yeah. Anjan is more the Sanskrit. So those devotees whose eyes have really been treated and they've been freed from the diseased condition, like the cataract. People who have cataracts, they just can't see. I mean, if they've got a really bad cataract, they literally can't see. So they need treatment, and then they can see. So the treatment is through bhakti. And Prabhupada makes a very important point. We have to take information of the form of the Lord from people who have seen him with perfect eyes smeared with devotional service. So we take information from them. They tell us, Krishna's like this, Krishna's like that. And then Prabhupada makes the point, in the material world also, we don't always see things with our own eyes. We sometimes see through the experience of those who have actually seen or done things. Yeah. So Prabhupada concludes the purport. So only with patience and perseverance can we realize the transcendental subject matter regarding the absolute truth in his different forms. He's formless to the neophytes, but he is in transcendental form to the expert servitor. So in verse 5, this form, the second manifestation of the Purusha, Garbhadaksha Vishnu, is the source and indestructible seed of multifarious incarnations within the universe. From the particles and portions of this form, different living entities like demigods, men, and others are created. Well, we already mentioned that. Yeah. He is not exactly the source, like they just manifest out of him, but they pass through him, because the vast majority, at least, they have Vaikuntha planets, but they descend. But when they descend through Garbhadaksha Vishnu. So yeah, Garbhadaksha Vishnu's process, how he gets things together in the universe, is explained again. We already talked about that. And interesting point kind of in the middle there. Well, let's see. So Brahma's the first to come out. He's generated from Rajagun. Vishnu became the Lord of the mode of goodness. From Brahma came Shiva. So therefore all three, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, because the Vishnu mentioned here is Kshirodakshai. Of being one of the guna avatars. That's Kshirodakshai. So therefore all three, namely Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, are incarnations of Garbhadaksha Vishnu. And then from Brahma come other demigods and others, and the universe is populated. So yeah, this Garbhadaksha Vishnu is very significant. It's mentioned there towards getting down further in the first paragraph, that he's glorified because he has his arms and legs everywhere, and he's a very significant person, Garbhadaksha Vishnu, glorified in the Garbha Stuti, which begin with a description of the Lord as having thousands of heads, etc. Yes. Oh, wait, no. All the incarnations, come through Kshirodaksha Vishnu, Prabhupada says. Yeah. Just Brahma and Shiva come through. Well, they also come from Garbhadaksha Vishnu. But Garbhadaksha Vishnu, no, wait a minute. Yeah, from Garbhadaksha Vishnu. He produces them. And then from Kshirodaksha Vishnu come the incarnations, all the avatars. And then in the second paragraph, some of the incarnations are mentioned. Leela avatars, Matsya Kurma Varaha, etc. Then there's also the guna avatars, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. And so, in the next paragraph, third, Vishnu's non-different from the personality of Godhead. Shiva is marginal. This is an elaboration on these personalities. Shiva is marginal. Well, we know from Brahma Samhita, Shiva is like yogurt, Vishnu's like milk, Shiva's like yogurt. It's sort of, the same, but not exactly. I mean, there's a distinct difference. Difference is like that between milk and yogurt, Prabhupada says, in the next paragraph. But in the third paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point that Brahma is all, Prabhupada says, Brahma is always a jiva tattva. The highest pious living being or the greatest devotee becomes Brahma. But then he goes on to say, still in the same paragraph, when there's no such living being to take charge of the post of Brahma, the Lord himself becomes Brahma and takes that role. And then, then Lord Shiva's described in the fourth paragraph. In the fifth paragraph, the Manus, they're the fathers of mankind in the universe, and however many of them, there's loads of them, 504,000 in the lifetime of Brahma. And then the sixth paragraph gives a list of the current Manus. Vaivasvata is the current Manu right now. But in this cycle, these are the Manus. Then in the seventh paragraph, Prabhupada talks about the different avatars, the Yuga avatars. Satya is white avatar, Treta is red, Yuga avatar, Dwapara is black, Kali Yuga yellow. So, anyway, second to last paragraph, all the incarnations are mentioned. I mean, not actually all of them, but so many. They're mentioned in the revealed scriptures, and therefore there's no scope for anyone to really successfully claim to be an avatar. Shouldn't be, because there's so much description in Shastra. And I must say, sometimes you see that the incarnations come through Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and sometimes maybe more you see they come through Kshirodakshaya Vishnu. Yeah. And ultimately they are one in two parts. So then last paragraph here, it's interesting. Talks about empowered incarnations, both directly empowered and indirectly empowered. This is something important. These direct means the Shakyavesh avatars, who are jivas, but they're empowered by the Lord with usually one of his potencies in a very substantial way. So therefore they're referred to as avatars, because they're manifesting the potency of the Lord. So directly empowered incarnations, here's a few examples. The Kumars, Narada, Prithu, Shesha, Ananta, etc. But then there's the indirect ones, indirectly empowered. They're called vibhutis. And they are mentioned in Bhagavad Gita in the 10th chapter. If you remember where Krishna says, amongst fishes I'm the shark, I am the, the gambling of cheats, and all these things. I am this, I am that. I am the beginning and end of all beings. These are the vibhutis. They're indirectly empowered types of forms, more in the context of, in relation to the universal form than anything, but they're manifestations of the power of the Lord, and therefore he says, I am. Those things. But it's not exactly that they're not Krishna in person. Like our fishes, I'm the shark. If we ever happen to be swimming down by the beach and you see a shark, don't get excited and start thinking it's Krishna. I must swim out and offer my obeisances. Not wise. So that was actually 5 verses. Okay, 5 verses. Dealing with the Purusha avatars. Now it's pretty much 1 verse per avatar. So let's have a look at verse 6. First of all, in the beginning of creation, there were the 4 unmarried sons of Brahma, the Kumars, who, being situated in a vow of celibacy, underwent severe austerities for realization of the absolute truth. So they were already just mentioned in the purport, if you remember, as being directly empowered incarnations of the Lord, Shaktyavesh. They're real Shaktyavesh, empowered substantially. So they came, they're sons of Brahma. Brahma wanted them to marry and produce population. They refused. And as Prabhupada says here, they underwent a severe type of disciplinary action as bachelors or brahmacharis. Yes. So, and all of them became qualified Brahmins. So anyway, that's just something about the Kumars. These verses are just basically saying some things about these avatars, most of whom, maybe not exactly all, but most, are more elaborately described in the course of the Bhagavatam. So, we'll save the more detailed description for when we come across them further on in the Bhagavatam. Verse 7, the supreme enjoyer of all sacrifices accepted the incarnation of a boar, the second incarnation. And for the welfare of the earth, he lifted the earth from the nether regions of the universe. And Srila Prabhupada makes a point at the beginning of the purport. The indication is that for each and every incarnation of the personality of Godhead, the particular function executed is also mentioned. There can't be an incarnation without a particular function, and they're always extraordinary. So in this case, the Lord appeared as Varaha, the boar, and a pig, of course, is connected with dirty things. The earth had fallen into the Garbhatak ocean, which is very dirty. It's very dirty down there, even though it's the perspiration of the Supreme Lord. So the Lord took that form, suitable form, for going to a really dirty place, and he rescued the earth from that dirty place, the Garbhatak ocean. So, yeah. But he, of course, remained transcendental. He wasn't reduced to being some sort of just lower class animal. Then verse 8. In the millennium of the Rishis, the personality of Godhead accepted the third empowered incarnation in the form of Devarshi Narada, who's a great sage among the demigods. He collected expositions of the Vedas which deal with devotional service and which inspire non-fruitive action. And you know, in the next few chapters, three chapters, if I remember correctly, we're going to get a whole lot of in-depth information about Narada Muni. So we won't go into it in detail, but he's another directly empowered incarnation. He's empowered with the Bhakti Shakti. That's the thing. The Bhakti Shakti. And as such, he has produced Narada Pancharatra, which teaches how to worship the Supreme Lord. And just in general, Narada Muni is a preacher. He preaches and preaches. He has many disciples around the universe. And like a doctor to sick people, he administers to them whatever treatment they need to get out of their maya and come to proper healthy state of Krishna consciousness. So then verse 9. In the fourth incarnation, the Lord became Nara and Narayan, the twin sons of the wife of King Dharma. Thus, he undertook severe and exemplary penances to control the senses. Yeah, so as Rishabhadeva advised his sons to do that, tapasa brahmacharyena, become brahmacharis, except tapasya. Yeah, not involved in family life, not involved with the family. That's brahmachari. Yeah. So Prabhupada doesn't really talk much about Nara and Narayan. Just that they did austerities, and it's a fact. Right at the end, Prabhupada says the incarnation of Narayan, or actually both Nara and Narayan, they worship still at Badrinath in the Himalayas. And you must come with us sometime because it's a real experience. Yeah, you came with us, didn't you? Yeah. That is an experience. That is really an experience. So on one side, there's one mountain is Nara, and on the other side, there's a mountain which they say is Narayan. So verse 10, the fifth incarnation named Lord Kapila is foremost among perfected beings. He gave an exposition of the creative elements and metaphysics to Asuri Brahman, for in course of time this knowledge had been lost. And in the purport, Prabhupada explains that Kapila, of course we're going to meet Kapila in a while, in the third canto. third canto or fourth canto. Anyway, fourth canto. We're going to meet Lord Kapila in some detail, but he established Sankhya philosophy, which Prabhupada says is generally called metaphysics by the European scholars. And Sankhya means etymologically, like literally, that which explains very lucidly by analysis of the material elements. So then, verse 11, the sixth incarnation of the Purusha was the son of the sage Atri. He was born from the womb of Anasuya, who prayed for an incarnation. He spoke on the subject of transcendence to Alarka, Prahlad, and others, like Yadu and Haihaya. So, Prabhupada explains in the purport about Dattatreya, how Dattatreya came to be, and it's explained actually in Brahmanda Purana. So Anasuya prayed to both Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, I want a son who is a combination of the three of you. And they accepted, and they did it. He appeared as Dattatreya, who is Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva in one form. And the Lord in that form preached to these different people mentioned at the end of the purport and mentioned also in the verse. Right, so now verse 12. The seventh incarnation was Yagya, the son of Prajapati Ruchi and his wife Akuti. He controlled the period during the reign of Swayambhuva Manu and was assisted by demigods such as his son, Yama. So if you read through the purport, we're not going to read through the whole thing, but you know what happened here is that there was no suitable person to take the role of Indra. So the Supreme Lord incarnated as Lord Indra. It was mentioned back then in that particular purport where it was described how he appears as Brahma sometimes. Sometimes he also appears as Indra or Prajapati, one of the Prajapatis. So we're in Vaivasvata Manu's period, but during Swayambhuva Manu's period, they couldn't find an Indra, so the Lord appeared. He took the role of Indra. Verse 13. Okay, let's have a look. The eighth incarnation was King Rishabha, son of King Nabi, and his wife Meru Devi. In this incarnation, the Lord showed the path of perfection, which is followed by those who have fully controlled their senses and are honored by all orders of life. Well, he's going to be described in the fifth canto in detail, King Rishabha. Yes. And Prabhupada, though, in the purport, he gives a fair sort of description. Rishabhadev, the way Prabhupada puts it, is he gives an elaboration on Varnashram, basically, the path of perfection. Yeah, this is the path of perfection. And culminating with sannyas as the last ashram. And he gives the stages of sannyas, Kutichak, Bahudak, Parivrajacharya, Paramahansa. It's the highest stage of perfection. So, and Prabhupada says that Rishabha incarnation of the Lord, instructed his sons to follow the path of perfection by tapasya. I mentioned the couple of words from one of the verses. Tapasa brahmacharyena. You should execute austerity, brahmacharyena, by brahmacharya. The ending ena, means by something, instrumental case. By doing something, or with something, but in this case, by performing tapasya. And so Prabhupada makes the point that human life is meant for spiritual realization through tapasya, chanting 16 rounds, following the regulative principles, maintaining the standards of whatever ashram you're in. If you're going to be a brahmachari, be a brahmachari. If you're going to, don't be sort of half and half. If you're going to be a householder, all right. Accept the path of being a householder. Vanaprastha and sannyas. So like this, he directed his sons. And he himself, in the end, became completely renounced. So verse 14, in the 9th incarnation, the Lord prayed for by the sages accepted the body of a king, Prithu, who cultivated the land to yield various products, and for that reason the earth was beautiful and attractive. King Prithu is in the 4th canto, so we'll be discussing him at length, considerable length. But Prabhupada in the purport here gives a little introduction. His father, the previous king, Vena, Prabhupada says, there was before the advent of King Prithu, there was great havoc of maladministration due to the vicious life of the previous king, the father of Maharaj Prithu, that was Vena. So the Brahmins came, and Prabhupada says, dethroned him. Well, they killed him. If you're killed, you're dethroned. So, yeah. They cursed him. They killed him by sharp words. That's what it says in the 4th canto. So then, he developed the earth. Actually, the earth was withholding foodstuffs, grains. But he got on the case of the earth, and the earth then started really producing. And so, as the verse says, the earth was beautiful and attractive. Verse 15, when there was a complete inundation after the period of the Chakshusha Manu, and the whole world was deep within water, the Lord accepted the form of a fish and protected Vaivasvata Manu, keeping him up on a boat. Well, in the purport there's a whole discussion about what happens when the Manus change, because there's so many of them during a day of Brahma. What is it, 13, 14, whatever it is? And so basically there's a discussion there about that. But Matsya, the Lord in the form of the fish, will also be discussed in detail, in due course, in the Bhagavatam. So verse 16, the 11th incarnation of the Lord took the form of a tortoise whose shell served as a pivot for the Mandala Achala hill, which was being used as a churning rod by the theists and atheists of the universe. So this was Lord Kurlama, Lord Tortoise, Lord Kurlama. He took the form or the role of being a pivot which the churning rod could stand on and then be pivoted on top of. Apparently he also had an itch on his back, and that helped to ease the itch, they say, yes. All right, and then verse 17. In the 12th incarnation, the Lord appeared as Dhanvantari, and in the 13th he allured the atheists by the charming beauty of a woman and gave nectar to the demigods to drink. So that will also be discussed. Well, it's later on actually in the 8th canto. Normally there's just one incarnation per verse, but here we get two. And verse 18. In the 14th, I don't know what happened to the 12th, but this is not all the incarnations. It's the main incarnations, as we've said. So verse 18, in the 14th incarnation, the Lord appeared as Nrsimha and bifurcated the strong body of the atheist Hiranyakashipu with his nails, just as a carpenter pierces cane. So that's 7th canto, of course. We're not going to go into it in detail till we do Bhaktivedanta, so just hang on till then. But there are some things in the 5th canto, there's some interesting things, a little bit. And in verse 19, in the 15th incarnation, the Lord assumed the form of a dwarf Brahmin, Vamana, and visited the arena of sacrifice arranged by Maharaj Bali. Although at heart he was willing to regain the kingdom of the 3 planetary systems, he simply asked for a donation of 3 steps of land. Yes. So Prabhupada makes a nice point in the purport. The Almighty Lord can bestow upon anyone the kingdom of the universe from a very small beginning, and similarly, he can take away the kingdom of the universe on the plea of begging a small piece of land. That's 8th canto also. So, in due course, we'll get there in a few years. So what, verse 20, right? In the 16th incarnation of the Lord, of the Godhead, the Lord is Bhrigupati, Parasuram, annihilated the administrative class Kshatriyas 21 times, being angry with them because of their rebellion against the Brahmins, the intelligent class. That's also there later on in the Bhagavatam. Later on is the story of Lord Parasuram. And anyway, in the purport, Prabhupada makes the point, the Kshatriyas are meant to rule under this direction of the Brahmins, the intelligent class of men, who give direction to them in terms of the standard Shastras. But in this case, it was not good. It was not good, actually. They really abused the Brahmins. It's really not good. Verse 21, thereafter in the 17th incarnation of Godhead, Sri Vyasadeva appeared in the womb of Satyavati through Parashara Muni, and he divided the one Veda into several branches and sub-branches, seeing that the people in general were less intelligent. This is Vyasadeva. This is Vyasadeva. So Srila Prabhupada gives some description there. Vyasadeva, Vyas means divider. Veda Vyas means the one who divided the Veda, because previously there was one Veda. It was called either just the Veda or the Yajur Veda. So he divided it into 4, because he could see Kali Yuga's coming, and the people, they're not going to be able to deal with this one massive, totally ginormous, even beyond that, just, such a huge literature. And here and there, different points are made. So he extracted the points and sort of isolated them or separated them from the other points, so people could just get into point by point. And particularly, how to approach the absolute truth. So it's for those who are not so bright. 22. In the 18th incarnation, the Lord appeared as Lord Ram. In order to perform some pleasing work for the demigods, he exhibited superhuman powers by controlling the Indian Ocean and then killing the atheist king Ravana, who was on the other side of the sea. So that's the 9th canto. That's the 9th canto. Yes. So in the purport, Prabhupada talks about how demons like Ravana, Hiranyakashipu, they don't want to get the mercy of God. They want to do it themselves. DIY, material advancement. So that's what Prabhupada discusses in the purport, that Ravana wanted to defy the proper system for life in the universe by sending unqualified people to Indraloka. And of course he challenged Lord Ram, he most certainly did. Verse 23. Yeah, well, this is interesting, isn't it? In the 19th and 20th incarnations, the Lord advented himself as Lord Balaram and Lord Krishna in the family of Vrishni, the Yadu dynasty, and by so doing he removed the burden of the world. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport notes the use of the term Bhagavan, which we talked about at the beginning. It indicates that Balaram and Krishna are original forms. This will be further explained later, particularly in verse 28, in fact. Yeah. So we've just about finished our time, devotees. I think we'll just end here, and tomorrow we'll carry on with what is at verse 24, Buddha, and because there's a lengthy purport, and actually in the Bhagavatam there's not so much, there's not a section like Lord Kapila, Lord Ram, Lord Vamana, Lord Varaha. They all have some chapters. But Buddha there isn't really, so Prabhupada does give a description here, which, we'll go through briefly tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.